Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another round of horror reads along with a few thrillers and some other books. We'll get into that. But included in this video, we are going to be talking about a coming-of-age story, and I think it's interesting that I'm reading this subgenre because if you had talked to me a few years ago, I would have told you that that was one of my least favorite genres. However, since then, I've actually read a lot of fantastic ones, and two ended up on my favorites of 2020. And so this summer I decided that I wanted to read the best coming-of-age story that I had ever heard recommended, and that is what I did. So I'm going to talk about that one here along with some other books and some rereads, some books that got even better the second time around. All that being said, let's get started. So I might as well start by talking about the coming-of-age story that I picked out as my summer read, and that is Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. And this follows a young boy who is driving with his father. They are going on a milk run because his father is the milkman. However, they come across a terrible accident. There is a car in the lake. However, when they go to try to save the person, they are already dead, and it looks like not an accident, but actually something more sinister, possibly murder. Now, the story actually follows them for the course of a year, and it follows them as they deal with the aftermath of that accident, and you get to see how it affected not only the boy but his father, and you also get to see how the boy grows up, because it's very much, as I was just saying, a coming-of-age story. And you also get to see how times began to change. This book, I believe, was set in the 1960s. I'll kick myself during editing if that is not the case. And this book had so much nostalgia. Of course, you can probably guess from looking at me that I was not a child at that time. But despite not being born yet, I've got to say this book made me so nostalgic for the 1960s. It just seemed like a simpler time, and the way that they described those iconic childhood moments, getting a dog and growing up with them, having a bike, and all of these moments, they just were so universal, and it really did hit home. So I gotta say, if you like the coming of age narrative, I do recommend this one. It did in a way remind me of some of Stephen King's books, which I've heard other people make those comparisons, but just based off my own bias, I actually like this one a lot more because I felt like it was a little bit of a cleaner take without some of the weird stuff that Stephen King tends to throw in. The characters, or at least the characters that we are following, the boy and his family, are very open-minded, and there really aren't any racial or homophobic slurs or anything like that that kind of makes me uncomfortable in some of King's work. So I gotta say that this was really good. But if you know me, you know that I have a tendency to prefer shorter fiction, and I do have to mention that while I loved so much of this book, there were other parts that I would have edited down, and I thought some sections were fantastic and other sections honestly didn't hold my attention. So I would have preferred this book a little bit shorter, a little bit tighter. But despite the fact that some sections just didn't interest me, my feelings towards the book when I think back on it are overly positive. I really liked it. I mentioned that this is a book I read during the summer, and everyone describes this as a summer book, but like I said, it really follows the course of a year, so they talk about Halloween and Christmas and all of that, and it's very well done. So I love the writing. I'm definitely interested in reading more of McCammon's work, so recommendations down below, please. But I would personally recommend it. A lot of people told me that this was not only their favorite coming-of-age story, but their all-time favorite book. And I can see why it's not my all-time favorite book, but it definitely holds up. It's definitely among the best in the coming-of-age subgenre, in my humble opinion. Next, I want to talk about the book club pick for my Patreon book club for August, and we read Sweetheart, Sweetheart by Bernard Taylor. This was actually a book that I nominated because I love the author so much. The short synopsis is that it follows a man who goes to investigate the untimely death of his brother and his new wife. They were at a cottage and there was a horrible, violent death that occurred, and so he goes there to investigate, and soon enough he gets pulled into whatever mysterious force caused their demise. Now, I'll be honest, I nominated this book for my book club because I've loved the author's other works so much that I pretty much decided I was going to read everything, and went into this one pretty blind. I'm not actually sure if I read that synopsis before nominating it. I loved his other book, Godsend, and also loved his book, The Reaping, which is my personal favorite, and so I was like, let's read Sweetheart, Sweetheart. I had some other nominations, but that's the one that they went with, and I gotta say I was a little disappointed. So it's not a bad book. I do still like his writing, but it read very differently than his other books. It didn't quite have the same narrative style. I've previously described him as very cozy in how he writes, and this one just felt very, very classic. I felt like it's a story I've read so many times before. It's basically a ghost story slash haunted house story, which is not my style at all, and it went in very predictable ways. It didn't subvert the subgenre or anything like that. And so the long and short of it is that I had no business reading it because I know my taste, and this was not it. It definitely had some good punchy moments. I was impressed by the level of violence given the fact that this is an older book. I tend to go with the assumption that older books can't be scary or can't be gruesome or violent or all of that, but it did have those elements, but it was predictable. I didn't really love the characters, and most of all, I just didn't really care about the plot. And again, that is my own fault. I know what I like and don't like to read in horror, and this is not the kind of book I normally pick up on my own. Next, I read Eat Your Heart Out by Kelly deVos. This is a young adult horror book that follows a group of teenagers that are sent off to a quote-unquote fat camp in order to lose weight. However, there is a zombie outbreak and the children have to band together in order to survive and get out. Now, first, I know, I just went on a rant about how I'm not going to read any more YA, and I still stand by that. I'm definitely going to be limiting it, but this book really caught my attention for a few reasons. It's a new release, and while I don't love YA, I really like what it does in terms of body positivity. This author in particular writes a lot of contemporary on the subject, and I love how she handled that aspect of the book. It's something that's very true to my heart, and it really hit home. And so I love the fact that it really addresses the idea of health at every size and just a lot of the myths and misconceptions around people's weight and health and body image and all of that. So I loved the commentary within this book. I also really like zombie books, so I'm very easily persuaded to pick up a book when I hear that there's zombies in it. Overall, I am kind of disappointed I picked this one up, but again, it's my fault. I knew what I was doing. And it's just the fact that it read more like contemporary than horror. Yes, there are zombies and there were some gruesome moments towards the end, but it's really a story about a group of children finding their own way, coming of age, all of that. And it's just not my cup of tea. It's not my kind of book. So I'm glad I checked it out because I would recommend it to a teenager or something that is looking for that kind of book, but it didn't really give me the scares and fun, entertaining zombie action that I was looking for. So again, glad I read it so I can recommend it. Did I enjoy it myself? Not really. Next, I read The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood. This follows a young woman who is a normal, average person with a good voracious appetite until she becomes engaged, and slowly she begins to feel like she can't eat anything. Her diet gets smaller and smaller, and she actually feels as if something is eating her. Now, if you're familiar with this book, you're probably wondering why I'm talking about it in this video, because it's technically classified as literary fiction, often described as a satire. It is Canadian lit. Like myself, I always love Atwood, and I'm going to sneak it into this video because I'm going to make the argument that if this book was published today in 2021 and if it had maybe a slightly punchier ending, it absolutely would be marketed as horror. Now, I look at the books that are marketed today as horror, like things like Lakewood, which really don't follow the traditional mold of what people come to expect from horror. And I would argue that this is a very quiet literary piece of horror that, again, just was not given that label because of the time that it was written. Horror has only recently become popular, so now marketers are actually taking the time to realize when they get these books, they get these manuscripts, that they're going through and going, we can sell this to the horror market, to the horror community, because they recognize that we're here. So I just read this book. It's actually a reread for me. If I remember, and if I don't hate it too much, I actually did a review of this book right when I started my channel. It is so cringy. Hopefully I haven't privated it already, but I might link that in the card so you can check it out. But this is actually a reread, so returning back to it because I got a chance to pick it up from Audible for a daily deal for $5, and I'm so glad I revisited it. It is just this most chilling, smart, feminist story that deals with all these really important topics and things that are close to my heart. Again, it deals with the idea of disordered eating, whether or not the character technically has an eating disorder, but she goes through those behaviors, so content warnings for that. But it really talks about the pressure that women are put to fulfill certain roles as women, as mothers, as wives, and the commentary is so on point. This book, I believe, was written in the 60s, but it feels so contemporary. It feels like it could have been written yesterday or today, and like I said, I found it to be chilling as a narrative, and the whole time I was feeling like this could have been horror, and I feel like so many people are skipping this one over because they have a lot of preconceptions about Margaret Atwood, about literary fiction. But like I said, if you like those really literary horror books that are coming out today that are very topical, dealing with a lot more social commentary, then this one is one you might want to check out. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. I'm really picky when it comes to giving a full 5 stars, but it did so many things right and I really loved it. And of course, again, it's Margaret Atwood. I'm Canadian. Obviously, I'm going to love it. And finally, I want to mention that I actually did a reread of a book I read pretty recently, and that is Only the Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I read this book earlier this year, and normally, for the sake of not being repetitive with content on my channel, I don't normally talk about rereads, especially this recent, but I did want to bring it up again because if you remember, I tried to read this book several times and it took me about 3 attempts before I got into it, and the first time around I said I liked it, but I didn't love it. This time it went from good to great. The short synopsis is that it follows a group of Native American men who years ago went on an elk hunting trip. Something went horribly wrong, and now they are possibly haunted by the elk that they killed, and their group is slowly getting picked off. And I love this one so much more the second time around. Once I realized what the author was doing, where the book was going, I can see why everyone gave it 5 stars when it first came out. It is so smart, and I really encourage everyone to give this one a try. It is just so rewarding and really a book that gets better with rereading it, and his prose, his social commentary, everything comes together. It is gruesome and dark and entertaining all at the same time. I do have to give huge content warnings for harm to animals, so if that's sensitive for you, this one might be a tough one to pick up, but if you can handle it, I do recommend this book. Like I said, it went from being a book that I liked to possibly a new favorite. I was so impressed, and I just wanted to let you all know that after rereading it, it really bumped up my appreciation for it. Along the same notes, I do want to mention that his new book, My Heart is a Chainsaw, is coming out or has already come out by the time you're watching this. This follows a girl that is living on reserve. She's a teenager who is obsessed with slasher fiction, and there is a resort community that is moving in near her reserve, and she possibly believes that there is a slasher on the loose. I previously talked about this book in a video talking about books that were worth the hype and books that you should skip over. This was definitely in the thumbs up recommendations category, and I just want to remind you that it's coming out very soon. If you found Only the Good Indians really enjoyable, I think you'll like this one as well because it deals with a lot of the same social issues. If you found Only the Good Indians hard to get into, I would actually recommend Chainsaw more because I thought that it was a lot more accessible, a little bit more of a simpler plot, and a lot more entertaining. So if that sounds up your alley, I do recommend checking it out. My preference is still Only the Good Indians just because I think it's a better book, but I think Chainsaw is going to be a really good entry point for those that want to try Stephen Graham Jones but have been intimidated by Only the Good Indians. So just want to mention that. Otherwise, let's move along. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Love to know of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out? And I got 2 questions for you. First, what is the best coming of age story in your opinion? I would love to read it if I haven't already. And also let me know about a book, horror or otherwise, that got better after rereading it, a book that went from good to great and became a favorite once you went and read it for a second or third time. I would love to hear all about that. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy. You can help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, and if you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.